Okay, I'm going to start by telling everyone a story. I was flying home from Berlin last year. I was very fortunate to be granted funds to train in dance and choreographic practices. And my flight was delayed, so I missed my transfer and I was put up in a hotel in London for the night. It was close to midnight, so myself and another Australian man in the same situation ended up at the Macca's across the road. He bought me dinner. Over hamburgers, he told me about his work for a company that builds Sydney's trains. He had been at a train fair in Berlin where millions worth of train technology was on display for companies like his from around the world to come and have a look. He and 7 of his colleagues were flown business class to go to this fair for 1 week. I asked him if it was interesting and if he learnt a lot. He said it was okay and not really. He expressed that he was disturbed and embarrassed by the amount of money his company spends on trips like this. He said, if only I knew this was only the beginning. Let's think about this. 8 business class flights. From a quick Google search, a business class flight, Sydney to London, on a special deal is at least $4,000 more than my economy flight. The extra $4,000 times 8 businessmen and engineers equals $32,000. That's similar to my taxable income from last year. That's similar to the amount of money I was granted by Lismore City Council in a one-off fluke chance after 5 years of campaigning to be able to make my first ever professional work, Wonder Babes, with the help of Northern Rivers Performing Arts, NORPA, the Lismore Quad Outdoor Arts Precinct and Southern Cross University. $32,000 would pay a team of artists to come to the Northern Rivers, camp up at NORPA for a month and do all the groundwork to formulate a brand new radical work of art. That would mean feeding 8 artists and their families for a month and would result in a major contribution to each of their professional trajectories. Every day, wells and wells of this money is being transferred from one big business to another big business, a train company to an airline, millions over and again. I don't begrudge the development of train technology. Bring it on, Sydney. But this is not what was happening when these men took this trip. The new Sydney trains, by the time they are made, will match where they should be at now. So very soon they will be out of date again. This man from the inside told me so. We are not investing in the future. And for me, this is because we as a nation do not believe in creative thinking. In 2015, the government presented a shiny new initiative for innovation. Digging into what this was, it became very clear that the government did not see the arts in that vision. Innovation would be driven by investment in and commercialisation of the so-called STEM disciplines: science, technology, engineering and mathematics. Organisations like the Australian Council for the Arts were far from their radar. I found this hard to comprehend. Innovation, the arts. From where I stand, they're synonymous. In Australia, we suffer a sickness, a disconnect from the life force of culture and creativity that makes us, and which is what we consume every day. To set the scene, I will speak to my discipline, the performing arts, and offer a few statistics. In Australia in the 90s, a bunch of performing arts companies were shored up and protected from collapse from the incoming tide of overseas works. There were about 23 of these companies, and now there's 28. They're called AMPAG companies, Australian Major Performing Arts Group. They are the Belvoir Theatres, the Australian Ballets, the Opera Australias, and they're also Bangarra, but predominantly they are state majors. To reinforce what that means, regional performing arts companies are not funded to exist. For our industry, this was a good thing at the time, and it was done to make sure Australian performing arts companies were solid and could survive, so they could continue to take risks and carve out a national voice. Ironically, now those companies are famous for being risk-averse. The cultural landscape in Australia has changed dramatically in the last 3 decades, but the way we fund the performing arts and who we get to make it hasn't changed. These 28 companies continue to get 2/3 of Australia Council funding. Meanwhile, the other 1/3 is shared amongst Australia's 500 independent companies, cut up into bite-sized chunks, which are too small to do anything much with. I'm talking federal level funding. If you want a quick snapshot of New South Wales funding, last year in a Create New South Wales grant round for new projects, 3% of applications were funded. 3% makes it not worth the effort to write the grant. AMPAG companies report to the Australia Council 1 time per year. In an indie company, someone is spending 50% of their time writing grants and acquitting them or reporting on their progress. 50% of someone's wage which is not funded because there is no organisational funding for independence. Their time spent trying to convince the funding bodies that don't have enough money to go around that their ideas are worthy of support. AMPAG is a privileged group defining performing arts making in Australia, a protected species. Young, aspiring performing artists understand that unless you can or want to enter their vortex, you are unlikely to be successful. But what do Australian audiences think about what they're making? 1/3 of audience attendance in Australia is at AMPAG companies' work, and 2/3 of audience attendance is at the other 500 independent companies' works. One AMPAG company in Melbourne receives $6 million from the feds, $6 million from the states. They're AMPAG. That's the deal. When Create New South Wales called me a couple of years back to say I won $5,000 to begin making Wonder Babes, I started crying. That's enough for my team for just 1 week of work. That was the first time I had received a yes based off an application for one of my works. $5K 1 week, tears of joy and gratitude. Sorry. That was very on cue. This is what the funding model has reduced us to. This year I will apply for 6 different grants that each offer $5K. $5K is rations to the poor. It's just enough to keep them alive and keep them begging, but not enough to do anything meaningful with, not enough to enable you to get above your station as a beggar. The funding situation proves that there is a complete lack of understanding of the life cycle of artists and the role of small to medium organisations to enable those artists to flourish. When you have to beg for money, it makes you feel worthless, and it makes you feel like your art is worthless. I don't believe that the resilience required to keep applying for grants endlessly is the kind of resilience that artists need. I think it's a trap, and I'm definitely ensnared in it. 2 years later, when we were launching that work's premiere, the designer who has designed and co-built $1 million sets for AMPAG companies, came to Lismore and worked to create his site-specific set for us for $10,000, and was giddy with excitement. And when he saw the dress run, he was awe-inspired, buoyed up to keep at it in this industry despite his fatigue. He was dreading returning to Sydney to make another set for another show that depressed him. When he was back at work, he sent me a text that said, FML. Fuck my life. We, as an independent collective, are now tirelessly applying for further opportunities to put that show on in front of an audience. To make performing arts productions commercially viable, internationally sellable, we need to pay designers, composers, directors, performers to bring their unique skills together to alchemically build a coherent, visually resolved, thrilling whole for the stage. We need to pay an army. All the independents do, just like the majors. And that is the army that Australia should be investing in. Who will lead us to understand ourselves as a nation, a diverse community full of ideas, compassion for each other, and ability to connect across class and culture divides. Who can represent us as arts innovators at home and abroad, who are creative thinkers that can forge the way for innovation in how we do things in all industries. As an independent artist or arts company, you have to question your culture continuously. You have to dig deep every day to question if what you are making is worthy to you, to your community, to politics, to diversity, to accessibility, and this is a good thing. The arts should be radical. This accountability is why independent performing artists are making the most dangerous and thrilling and progressive and beneficial art for audiences to experience. The independent work is the frontier. We, as a country, should be accountable on all these fronts for all our work and to everything we do in business and other industries too. We should aspire to this. The independent arts shows us how, and that is why they are so vital. Every year, hundreds more brilliant Australian arts practitioners leave the arts to do other work, to become financially stable. The only reason why I'm still at it is because I live with my parents. I'm 32, and my partner lives there too. It's not ideal. And not everyone is so lucky. And so a creative life is not open to those from all sectors of our society, and that is a horrible thing for Australian art making and creative thinking. What kind of families are we building? Ones where mums and dads used to be artists until shit got real when the kids came along. What does that teach our kids? Children are highly creative, and a world with this thinking slowly knocks it out of them. What hope do we have retaining this capacity in our kids if we as a nation don't believe in the value of creativity? An 18-year-old girl said to me recently that if she could choose any career in the world, if they were all paid the same, she would choose visual art. But she said she knows that there's no point even trying if you aren't at the top of the field. What does that even mean at 18? I was told this very same non-truth by an executive of Macquarie Bank who came to speak to hundreds of year 11 and 12 kids from a number of local Northern Rivers schools. She said, if you want to follow a career in sports or the arts, you better be at the very, very top of the field. You better be the best, or else you will only fail and be unsuccessful in life. I'm sorry, but what? Who let her into our minds? What quantifies success? I remember sitting there in the audience fuming. Creative work is not something that should be reserved only for those who have already proven they can paint like Caravaggio or show promise to be selected for the Australian Ballet. Art making and creative thinking is, beyond technical skill, about seeing the world in new ways, and storytelling and reflecting our world and our times back to us in all forms of expression and in forms we haven't seen before. It is designing all we interact with, everything we touch, everything we see, not to mention the benefit to individuals if they engage in art making for pleasure. It's been proven. It does reduce cortisol. It is good for us. Of course, not everyone can be professional artists, but we need to be aware of art's significance. And being successful is not having won one of the tickets to be invited to wear a suit and go to work in a bank all day. When George Brandis came in and created an arts funding shitstorm, one that has not come close to being recovered, we learned that his idea of excellence is ballet and opera. Take a look at this snapshot. We, Australia, a colony, take our artistic excellence, a work by the Australian Ballet, to Taiwan to show what we make here. Is this not a joke that we are presenting as having the best ballet in the world? We are not a post-colonial nation when we do this. We are suggesting that we are the keepers of this European elitist art form. This act is in essence racist. To present this as our national artistic voice. Brandis's actions revealed an Australian insecurity about being uncultured. This is racist. We are not investing in ourselves as a culturally diverse nation, our ideas, our stories, our aesthetic, our forms, what we actually are, what we care about. We are investing in what our governing bodies remain to aspire to on our behalf. While the government believes that performing arts is a live history museum where the privileged can nod knowingly from their seats, we are completely stunted as a creative nation. Of course, we should still have ballet and opera. I don't want money taken away from the majors. I want to make that clear. Their work is necessary too, and many of those companies are also working hard to diversify and to bring in innovation to the extent that they can or are brave enough to within their own binding relationship with their subscriber audience. But they can't come close to being everything for all of us, and in particular they can't alone speak for the experience of people in the regions. This is a big country. Funding these established companies should not be a case of job done. We need to have innovation in the arts to find our national voice, to understand ourselves. This will filter into every aspect of the Australian economy. There is no greater challenge we as artists face than finding the language to communicate the value of the arts to the Australian economy, to effectively advocate such that we as a community have a collective understanding of the role of a creative life. Perhaps then we could have a discussion about giving artists a living wage, like they do in places like Iceland, so that artists from all cultural and class divisions, when they don't have work on, are supported to continue to live and make art. There is an inquiry being done right now into the current funding model for the performing arts. We don't need tweaks. We need arts funding to be completely reimagined. And who should be responsible for paying for it? My answer is we should all be held accountable for our cultural landscape and demand abundance, diversity, vigilance, innovation and legitimacy for art making in Australia. If there was an initiative where businesses could offset their tax by supporting an artist or arts company, would they? If there was a public understanding that every business class flight you book is one less artist who could have lived for a month and made art, would less be booked? Making the arts viable is possible. We just have to begin by understanding what creativity in the arts means to us and what our Australian economy could be if we invested in it. Thank you.